And it's my great honor to introduce the first two speakers, well-renowned scientists in our Amsterdam UMC and in the ACHSS, but also in the AISSS. So give them a warm welcome, Caroline Bolling and Femke van Nassau.
Hello, you can see that we have a really beautiful road in front of us, so it seems like the future is bright, right? Not like usually Dutch weather anyway. But we are here to talk about something really simple, the future of sports injury prevention research. So as we already said, I'm Caroline Bolling.
Yeah, and I'm Femke van Nassau.
Yeah, and I need that thing to pass slides. So you know that there is some boring thing going on in the other side. It's hamstring. If you still believe in that thing, that okay, we found the solution, it's one exercise, we can reduce 50% of injury, I need to also remind you that nobody uses. So if you still have time to go there if you want. Because what we're going to talk about here, we will not talk about things that we already know. We know that we can prevent injuries. And this is kind of this average number that we found in almost all the systematic reviews. The previous one that I showed, it's the same thing. We can prevent or we can make injuries like half less frequent. And that's based on all the RCTs and the beautiful studies that we are doing that it's quite controlled. The problem is we don't see this in reality. And then it became something that people call the real-world implementation, which is really strange because it sounds like we are creating science, but not for this world. Probably in the moon we can prevent 50% of injuries. But for real world, we need something else. This is what people say, the idea of the rocky road from a RCT to the real world, for the real world injury reduction. That's what happens. So this is one example from the knee. So I went away from the hamstrings. But this was an ACL study that they did. And you can see that you could get 64% of reduction of injuries. But for that, you just check in the controlled environment. You have to have people that know. So if you go to the right side, you need to reach people, so people need to know about this. Then you need to see if the program works. People need to decide to use it. Then people need to have to use it correctly. And then people need to keep using. And you can see that we are not so happy with the 12% later on, despite all the big promise of the 50%. So that beautiful road that I just showed you, we might have an issue here. It looks bright, but it seems like we cannot get there. And we try to reveal this. And I know that Willem is here. So this is the model from Willem van Mechelen plus 2. What is the plus 2? It's the 2 stages that try to look to the implementation context. It sounds like could solve the problem. So first you do injury surveillance, then you check what is causing the injury, what's the mechanism, develop measures, check if it works in the ideal conditions, and then after that you need to check what is the context and if it works in that context. So that's implementation, and that's my cue for Femke.
That's my cue. Well, let's talk about implementation. And I want to use 2 numbers to tell you a little bit about implementation. One is 17 and one is 14. So 17, it takes on average 17 years from an initial idea to be implemented in practice. So 17 years. That brings me to my second number, 14. So of all the developed ideas and interventions and programs, only 14% makes it to real life. So that means that we are developing a lot, but well, not always we have real impact in real world because it takes so long and not everybody makes it. But fortunately, we have some guidance for you to help you to make sure you belong not to this 14%. And I want to highlight this a little bit by a fishbowl. So imagine the small fishbowl is you and your research team or your small team are developing something. So this is the context in which you are developing your exercise or your program. Then your program, in this time the fish, will jump to the big fishbowl. And the big fishbowl is the real world. And in this picture you see beautiful, the small fishbowl looks perfectly alike the big fishbowl. But and if we click, what do we think? We develop something and the magic will happen. The fish will jump from the small fishbowl, whoop, to the big fishbowl, and we fix our problems. But the reality is a bit harder, like we said. Only 14% of the fishes will make the big jump to the big fishbowl. And that's because we often do not make sure that the small fishbowl looks like the big fishbowl in real life. So we develop something in a controlled setting with a specific subpopulation, and then we think, well, it works in our trial setting, so when we jump, everybody's happy and will wait and is waiting for this intervention. But the reality is a bit harder. But we have a formula for this. So how can you make sure you are not those 14% that is not going to make it to real world? There's a simple formula for that. You need to have an effective preventive measure, you need to have an enabling context, and you need to have effective implementation methods. And if you multiply those, that's important, multiply those, you can have impact on injury prevention. So simple formula, right? So let's dive a little bit into that. So let's assume we have an effective preventive measure. And, well, that works. So let's see what an effective preventive measure would look like.
Well, that's our effective preventive measure. It's our 50% reduction, our beautiful program. It's also the one that is already a world champion. Again, Emmy, we have Red Bull again here. But the problem is our perfect intervention was built in a context or in that fishbowl that it's not the fishbowl where this program's supposed to run. So this car, it's really, really fast. But this car needs a Formula One track. It doesn't perform for that. And if this is the best intervention, we might have an issue. Because if you look back, we need to have an effective preventive measure. But then if that car needs to be in that road, will not perform as we expected. So it was kind of a good car if I would tell you that we had a Formula One track. But if it needs to perform here, we have a big issue. So it might be effective, but depends where and for whom. So then we get to the context. You realize we didn't know the context, so we need to dive into the context. And then if we look back to the sequence of prevention again, and it's that simple model that just looked to problem description, etiology, and preventive measures, and assessing if it works or not. That's what we like to do mostly with research, and where our programs end up with the 50%. So we look to the injury and just to the injury. And then after that, we look to the isolated risk factors. So we try to prove that was exactly that specific thing that make that person get injured, or how much that thing is responsible for the person getting injured. And then after that, I say, so I fix exactly that risk factor, that isolated risk factor, and I check if it works. And we end up with that perfect product, but for the wrong context. And what if we start looking to the injury, but already in the context? So we already know what looks like that fishbowl. And then not look only the isolated risk factors, look to everything around, contextual determinants. And then we build the intervention already knowing where you need to implement. And it might be that you're going to produce a product that fits better that context. The thing is, how we know about context. Because we are very comfortable, and people in hamstring are really happy they're just talking about hamstring. Doesn't matter who owns the hamstring. But any knee, any hamstring, any ankle belongs to an athlete. And this athlete works in a specific sport, trained in specific sports. It's also part of a specific association in a specific country. And there is so many layers between all that the athlete comes with their own beliefs, the sport might be a specific culture or even like the social structure. The association might have a budget. Today, when we were talking with Christy, she's clearly said, well, in football, it's possible. They have money. So even having this, doesn't matter which sport, women menstruate anyway. So, but that experience in one can be different than the other just because of budget. And also country. I am originally from Brazil, and nobody do anything with cycling there. So imagine a Brazilian cyclist that there is some that go to the Tour de France, believe it or not. But there, imagine, I don't know them. I never heard about them. Imagine the knee of a Brazilian cyclist and the knee of a Belgian or Dutch cyclist. It's the same knee. But can you imagine how the injury prevention and even the treatment will be a completely different process? Just because one thing, sports popularity, where that need belongs, because that person is from a specific country. So in that case, context really, really matters. And I think Emmy already gave like a great talk showing how important it was to look at all that. But how do I know all those layers? And that's a really simple thing. I love this figure. Again, we have fish bowls. So this is a fish asking to the other one, hey boys, how is the water? And the other one's like, what the hell is water? So the first thing that if we want to know more, first we need to talk. And we also need to realize that sometimes we are so used to see some things that we even not able to see different perspectives. So the best way to do that, it's really talking. And then it comes the other part of the research, that it's what I like to sell, it's qualitative research, which I know it's not sexy at all. But let's say that we could make some questions that will change the way that we look to things and we learn what other people think. I wanted to know how elite athletes, coaches, and physiotherapists perceive a sports injury. And I was afraid that maybe all the theoretical definitions that we have, for instance, we all know here, there is time loss, there is any complaints, there is seeking for medical care. So we have many options here, right? But does it look like that if I ask to an athlete? Because we love to rely on all the self-reported tools. So when I ask them, how do you define an injury? They start with that thing. Well, you know, there is symptoms. Sometimes I feel that there is something wrong. Sometimes it's that pre-injury feeling, tight, whatever. But for them, what really matters is, does it hamper my performance? And if hampers performance, depends of a bunch of contextual things again. Depends of the period of the season, if it's day starting. Depends of periodization, for instance. Depends of the level of performance they are being required at that specific moment. So, but the question for them is, does it hamper my performance? If does, then I would name it, yes, I'm injured. If it's just pain, oh, come on. That's not injury. And then the next question, still they will not look for any of you. They would think, can I still play? And of course, if it's a final of a World Cup, or if they have a really strong motivation to make it to the big team next year, they will go on. They want to play. And then the next point would be, can I still manage myself? And then, of course, sometimes you already had that injury before, so you know exactly what to do. You know that if you reduce a little bit your load, will be okay. And can be also that you have someone that you can ask. Some people say, well, I have a friend that I can ask if it's okay or not. And then the next point will be, then they look for you. So, and even going to a doctor will depend, again, Emmy already said about that today, communication, trust, and perceived competence. So if they see that they could be listened, then they finally will report either to the coach or to the medical team or to both of them. So you can see that there is a long road here until this athlete really say, yes, I'm injured. So that's how important it is to talk with them. We did this study in other people, with other populations, circus artists, dance artists, recreational runners, and concepts of injury are completely different depending who you ask. So the who, it's really important here.
Yes, and if we know the who, then we still need to know if we have something, how is this going to work? So again, a number. I like numbers. This is 16%. And 16% is the number of people that if I have a new injury prevention measure and I would reach out to you, that would say, yeah, I'll give it a try. but that means that 84% says, let me try. I don't know yet. Because this is building from the diffusion of innovation model. You might know it from Rogers, it's already pretty old. That says we have 2.5% of the innovators. Those are the people, if there's something new, they don't care, they just want it. So those are the people, and these are the people, if they say yes, they pretty fast say yes as well. So that's the 16%. But think about the trials we run. We reach out to populations saying, we have something new. Would you be willing to participate in our trial? Where do you think they fit on this scale? Those are the 16% people. So be aware that in our trials, we have the people who would say, yes, I'm willing to do this. But there's 84% of people that says, not sure yet. Because there's people who will say, well, once these people like it and are convinced about it, they might do it. Maybe a little bit later, these people might do it, but the laggards, they don't want to do this unless you make them do it. So be aware that there's always people not willing to implement what you have developed. And can some people give reasons why you would say yes to something new? An injury prevention program. Learning opportunity. So you're suffering with injuries and you want to fix it. Yep.
Your job is at stake.
Your job is at stake. Yeah, that could be something. And what could be a reason to say no? No time, money, never had an injury. Yeah, previous experience with previous programs that didn't work. And as you can see, often it's two sides of the same coin. So for example, I had an injury before, so that might motivate me to say yes to something new. But if I never perceived or experienced an injury, I don't care. I'm not injured. But it's two sides of the same coin. So Caroline already said, well, we have to talk to people. And we don't only need to talk to our athletes, we also need to talk to all the people around this specific athlete. Because if this is how people see the world, we might have a completely different view on it. Where I might see, whoa, there's a boat. This other stakeholder involved around this athlete might see it as a land. And we think we talk the same language, but we talk about something completely different. So it's important to not only talk to athletes and how they perceive it, but talk to all the broad stakeholders. So that could be coaches, trainers, sports federations, maybe the ministry if they are funding something. But think really big in who are my stakeholders. So what I usually do, I start making a really, really long list of my stakeholders. So who are the people I want to talk to? And when I talk to them, I'm explaining, well, this is a new program we developed or that we want to implement. What do you think? And then you will quite easily hear, are you of the 16% or the 84% people? But you want to talk to both, because you want to know why would people say yes, but you also want to know why people would say no. And there were some reasons mentioned, and this is a model I like personally because it's building around the whole system. So you have the user, which is the athlete or the sports participant, then the provider who is doing the coaching or the training. They work at a specific organization, and that organization is embedded within a bigger system. And you see there's many words out there that could either hinder or facilitate implementation. An example is, for example, if you look at trainers and coaches, if they don't have the skills or the self-efficacy to guide the training and to deliver the program, that might hinder them from doing the intervention as you developed it. If you look at the organizational level, you might as a coach or a trainer think, oh, I'm keen to do this, but if some of the management you are working for say, we don't think injury prevention is important, so don't waste your time on it, you can be as a person really enthusiastic, but then your organization isn't supporting it. And furthermore, funding, it was already mentioned, money is always a big issue. So if you have developed something which is really complex and costs a lot of money and nobody's willing to pay for it, well, that will be a barrier for implementation. So it's good to define your stakeholders, who is everyone involved within the implementation process, and what are they thinking about the stuff you want to implement? Do they like it or not, and what are their considerations? Because if you fixed, if you, well, fixed is easy. If you identified, so you have an effective preventive measure and you investigated your stakeholders and their considerations within the context, then you still need to develop effective implementation methods because remember, it's all multiplied. Well, let's go back to the racing. You can have this perfect racing car, like we mentioned before. But if there's no team, if the driver didn't get proper training, if there's no funding here, then still you have this really nice car standing somewhere in a garage not being used. What we often see actually with preventive measures. But there's a solution for this. So once you have identified facilitators and barriers for implementation for your specific stakeholders, you can find solutions for this. And this is work of Byron Powell and colleagues who talked to many people engaged in developing implementation strategies, and they clustered 73 strategies within these domains. And I'll explain them a little bit. So for example, support and interactive assistance. If you think about a racing car, they need to have a team. Only the racer by itself with the car won't make it. You need to have a team you can rely on, who bring information, who provide feedback. So you need to have a team. Train and educate, and that's something we love. Within our preventive measures, we love to send people training and give them exercises to do, and this is how you should do it. So it's important, of course, to train people, but really be aware, what am I doing in this training? If people have a lack of knowledge, you want to maybe address the lack of knowledge. But if people don't have the skills and you are working on their knowledge, then the training doesn't really fit with the problem you have identified before. So training is important, but make sure that the content of the training is really addressing the strategies or the barriers you found before. Stakeholder relationships is important if we think about sports injury prevention and think about the whole system and all the stakeholders you have identified. They all play a role within the implementation process. And I think this is an important one, to use evaluative and iterative strategies. And this is just feedback loops. So you can learn from doing by practice. It's the plan, do, act, check, what some people might know. So if you are putting something into practice, and I think with the racing, they do it all the time. After each race, they sit down, look at all the data, look at all the information. What did go good? What did go wrong? How can we learn from this? And we often, with implementation, oh, we're implementing, it's fine. But we might not be doing fine. So I think there's an opportunity to learn from doing it. Engage end users, trains infrastructure. With the car racing, they have a new car every year. They're not going to stick to the same car each year. They will change it continuously. So think about your preventive measures. If we developed it once, should we stick to it forever, or maybe also make sure we change it over time? Of course, finances are a big issue, and also adapt and tailor to the specific context. And that relates to what Carolyn told before.
So we have the perfect formula, and now you can go and make impact into injury prevention. So I would say that the two big messages that we have here, me and Femke, we are kind of this dual presentation. She's convincing the fish to jump from the ball, and I am talking with the fish, trying to know how is the water. So, and it's two things that we have not been doing in research very often, because we are always like stuck to some of the methods that we just like to use all the time. So it's also trying to get new methods and new ideas. So what can you do tomorrow? I think the future, again, I really believe it's bright. I think the one message would be we need to think about implementation from day one. The other thing is we need to explore different perspectives and context and know about that. But the only way to do that, it's by talking with them. And we should stop to think that we can have all the solutions. We need to build together with people that are really in the field. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline and Femke. I think you guys were both inspired by the Disney emoticons yesterday, because you were looking for Finding Nemo, I guess, in there. Are there any questions from the room first? Maybe some people. I have a question in the meantime, because we have room for about 2 questions. With all the experience that you have gathered over the years doing research and also doing practical, practical sessions in that one, what will be your, or both of you, your one golden trick or point from a practical perspective to make those years get smaller, so that you only have like 5 or 2 years in order to implement that? Because you were able to show many nice models and figures, but from your own perspective, what would be the best practical tip to us and to yourself?
Oh, I usually say that we love all the health methods on research, but we are a little bit stupid because we don't look abroad. So I would say like design thinking, it's a great one. If anyone from marketing would like to develop a new product, the first thing that they do is they go out there and say, what would you like to have? And we just don't do that. And the idea of talking, it's really like we say, oh, but later on I will ask if they think this is okay. No, we should start really asking, is this something that we do? Most of us probably, yesterday we were playing padel, and I think someone saw Dino stretching before, but most of the people just were like, okay, you're gonna play. Nobody was like caring because come on, now it's time and we are here and so nobody cares about that. So think about what will be the things that people would like to do, and for that you really need to talk with people. So before you even develop anything.
Yeah, I agree with the talking. I think talking is always good, but I think another part is important, that it's about people. And you want to, in order to implement injury prevention, it's behavioral change, because you were doing it some way and now we want you to do it something different. And that's for the athlete, but also for the coaches and the training and the organization. So it's, in my perspective, a lot of behavioral change. And we just too often just think the magic will happen, boop, we developed it and everybody will adopt it. And I think that's something we need to be more aware, that we're dealing with humans here. So they are hard to change. So it takes a lot of effort to, at all the levels, make this behavioral change.
In the meantime, any questions from the room? Paul.
Thank you very much. Inspiring presentation. Took a lot of pictures. Beforehand, when we do the RCTs, should we be more strict to the the patient, the intervention, the comparison and the outcome? For instance, looking at the patient, we only normally have a case definition, and then we say, well, he has to fill or she has to fill in a questionnaire, that's it. And maybe also for the intervention, can we add to that to already bring the message of you regarding implementation also in the designs for the RCTs? Have you any ideas about that? Or is it the wrong way?
No, I think this is excellent, because I think when you're designing an RCT, you should think about the context and the implementation beyond your RCT. So you can already design your small fishbowl to something that looks as much like the big fishbowl you want to implement it later on. Because often we think, no, for now we do it like this, but later on we'll do different. But then if you think about the effectiveness of your fishbowl, it doesn't resemble the big fishbowl. So what is the effectiveness if you're going to do it completely different afterwards? So I think when designing for an RCT and designing your intervention, I think it's essential to think about the context and implementation. Yeah, so don't wait. Yeah.
And I would just add to that, because I know that when we think about interventions, we immediately go to the PICO questions, and then you have like the P, that it's that person. But I also feel that maybe in the future we need to try more to change system instead of to change people. So maybe we need to include something bigger around that. So we usually consider, okay, I treat this person with that. So why don't we say about I treat in that context that have this and this and this and these levels? So you also need to consider everything that is around that knee or that person. So it's also like, I think in the future we need to stop to try to change the patient and try to change the system, because most of the times this will make bigger impact as well.
We have time for a last, very small question from here. Sorry.
Hey, Caroline, this is for you. Maybe you can help with that too. What are your thoughts on using patient-reported outcome measures? Even I know that's what I want to ask you. And just thoughts on that and the way we're using it in sports, and it's completely different we're using in clinical settings. Right. So
Who here use patient report outcomes? Everyone, right? But the thing is, most of the patient reported outcomes, it's the outcomes that I chose that they will be important for your patient. And I think that's a big example. And I would go away from sport, and I was just once talking with a patient that had a really bad arthrosis case and all. And to be honest, pain was not really, of course, there is pain and all. She could deal with all that. Her main outcome with treatment was the day that she could just sit down on the floor and play with grandchildren. So, and that was for me, I can put 5 to 10 or 10 to 8 or whatever. I don't care the number. For her, that thing was the most important. So I would call this a really patient-reported outcome, despite we don't have in any questionnaire, can you sit with your grandchildren and play in the ground?
Thank you.